So anyways, my name is Paul McKay. There's no one going to say anything other than that? Okay, anything else? No? All right. I was thinking about what topic would like to discuss today. And in fact, Carson, who usually is here and has helped run many of the meetups in the past, we were talking about how it would be nice to be able, we've had a lot of vendors over the years come and present. Tried to make sure they were presenting their open source wares, but giving a perspective that we might not have, with all those vendors out there, and to be able to see, have them pitch a little bit, but also to see the technology. And it came to our attention, Carson and I, that maybe we've had very few discussions in which we talk about fundamentals of Kubernetes. Why we would use certain things. And so for the next few, we're going to try to approach some of those. And we know that there are experts out there that will be beneficial to have amongst us to give us understandings and their perspective. But I think it'll also help for those that may not be in that Kubernetes world for so many years to be able to get some perspective on some basic stuff. And so that's kind of where this one kind of came out of, by saying, well, wait a second, let's even back up one and say, to Kube or not to Kube? That is the question, right? Should I even think about Kubernetes? It's funny to me how the journey that I've been on, and many of you, how with that, what is that adoption curve, crossing the chasm or whatever, you have the early adopters, and then you have kind of, and then you have the, I always think Kubernetes is still on, am I drawing it correctly? Kind of here. But it seems like it's getting more up here, kind of mainstreamish, and people are pretty much accepting it as, I should be looking at this for one reason or another. But there still should be a question for every one of us, even if we're using Kubernetes, is should we be using it? Why are we using it? And is there something else? Same better, but is there something else that could fit the needs? So that's kind of the thought pattern for tonight, is to kind of talk about that. And of course, this clicker is not going to work, which is fine. So, as a start out, you got to use AI now for everything, right? And so anything that's on here that has any illustration is very interesting, because I'm very interested to see what AI will do with a certain, could you give me an image of blah? So that's what all this stuff is, just to see what it would turn out to be. But it's kind of interesting. I think the question that I have is, first, always ask the why. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish in all of this? Now, I think all of us have this notion of, I've got something that I've created, I've got something that I want to deploy somewhere, I want something that'll actually be exposed to the world, and because of that, there's some things that I need to do with that application. I need to manage it, right? There's always these problems of, okay, I hope it scales. I hope that I can have that wonderful experience where I'm a hockey stick of growth that people want, and I just need to scale. And the other thing is, I need to find out, I need to monitor it. I need to see if it's alive, if it's not, health of it is. And then the most important thing for businesses is, and I make money, right? I need to make money out of it. And so I need to understand the cost of delivering, of monitoring those applications with the notion of what I'm getting out of it, right? Are the costs of doing all that really giving me that benefit? So before I kind of get into the to Kube or not to Kube, I thought it'd be interesting, at least for me, maybe for you as well, to talk about kind of a journey that I've been on, and I think it's very similar to a lot of you. I've been in the industry a fair amount of time, and where I really came into this space, I guess would even go further back than I'm even going to talk about here. I'm an old Unix guy, and so what we would do is we'd image boxes, pixie boot with the, thing, and image them, and, that's how you do stuff. And then I would say, Linux was just a garage toy, still is, but no, I'm just saying. No, but it's come a long ways, and so then that came out, and then that became a platform that then people could develop on. Well, then later on, skipping a lot of years, I got into application virtualization, and that was more of when I was with Symantec. It was a notion of taking an application itself, and in the user space, nod a little bit because there were many filter drivers involved, and there was, stuff that was doing with the registry, but it really was at that application space trying to isolate applications. So I could run IE6 on a box that doesn't support it anymore, those type of things. And so as part of an architecture group that was dealing with that software virtualization aspect of it. And then, because of that, and not because of that, but in that same period, as well as maybe before, VMware was the king queen of this notion of abstraction, abstracting something that now I can maybe put it on something other than, this Dell box. I could put it on another box. I don't have to worry about different things, right? And lived that world a little bit, and then came along Docker. Now I remember it was KubeCon, excuse me. I don't think either I was there or somebody had gone there and had come back saying, hey, there was a little buzz going on about this stuff called Docker. And of course I was familiar with the underpinnings, LXC, C groups, namespaces, all that stuff. I had actually been involved in the company that we were looking at, anyways, that's another story, but of KVM that later got purchased by Red Hat. So I was understanding that technology, and so I remember when it came out that it was beta. I started with Docker when it was beta, and I said, wait a second, this now, instead of this application virtualization type thing, or instead of this humongous VM thingy, here is this notion of isolation that we wanted and a way of packaging it, right, in this world of containers. And so I remember talking to a colleague of mine, and I said, this would be interesting if we take something and be able to distribute that something, a container, or an image that would then be run as a container, right, on multiple machines. And so we kind of designed this little thing, a little agent, in which he created, an endpoint, which he could say, hey, agent, here's the image I want you to, download, and I want you to run, and here's the port, and off you go. And so it was kind of fun. Here we had a little, really not even close to, but in the same vein of a kubelet, if you will, of something that was monitoring, looking at a container running on a remote system. And out of that, we said, this is hard. This is hard to do it in scale. And that's when Kubernetes was being talked about. And so I remember we were on, it was alpha, I can't even remember which point it was. We started playing around with Kubernetes because we could see within it that Google, through their board project, and then the inner one, which Kubernetes came out of, which was Project 7, right? That they had something that we could never build on our own. And that was this way of distributing these containers in a way and supporting those in such a unique but wonderful way. So that's kind of the journey that I've kind of come through. And then I've always thought Kubernetes is Kubernetes. Please.
Did you skip over CH root jails?
Well, that's true. And then we had the Solaris world, right?
Yeah. You see all that.
Yeah, that was part of it too. The Cherudine plus the other, and then this and the. No, I was in that world too, but we never. There weren't very. The problem, and I think the reason why Docker, I was so excited about Docker was, it was not that it was really novel. It was that it provided a tool or a set of tools to instrument things that were more difficult to do by hand.
Yeah.
And that's what was, I mean, you got some shell stuffies and you got some other stuff for the other world. But it never, at least to my opinion, I don't think I ever saw anything to the level that Docker did with the LXC, that you could have done in the Cherudine, the jails, and Solaris, they call it something else.
Ports or portals?
Yeah. And
It was at the time, I felt it was very much a different purposes. Like early Docker was also like very painful in a lot of ways, but
it was.
But the things that they were basically approaching from different directions towards that isolation for different reasons.
Yeah, and I think one is the encapsulation of tools on top of stuff, but also I think one of the key parts of Docker was the registry.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be able to put something up somewhere, and then I can have that to be brought down in a way that was common, right?
Distributing like CH root jails was never even like a thing, except like some random project of some dudes like, I would be nice to block.
Yeah, but still, where the image is going to be put? How did they get on there? How do I manage those things?
Whereas Docker, the registry, like you say,
Yeah, and I think
changed everything.
yeah, and so in that regard, it's amazing. And again, I always have to edit some things, but I probably won't now. But when you think about where I think Docker went wrong, was their notion of not embracing the open source world for that runtime, and then caused some sort of a fraction inside that space. But the thing is, let me just back. So now I'm in this Kubernetes world, and I remember 8 years ago, I remember when I was trying to, at a certain company, promote it to get to the cloud. I remember people were just keep on saying, Paul, you must have a tattoo, of some Kubernetes thing on you. And I just, because I was talking about it, I said, this is something here. This is something that you really use. It's something that, yes, alpha, but it's going to be something. And how do you know? Well, because it's coming out of years of real research, of real usage within inside of Google land, right? Thanks, Jared. So just as an overview, very quickly, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Again, Kubernetes is open source. That's a wonderful thing. VMware, not. It really facilitated this notion of this deployment, scaling, the management. Again, it's based on known technologies, not exactly, but enough that Google said, hey, here's a good representation. Some basic wonderful principles coming from Unix, small tools built with each other. And then this notion of using a very declarative type model to describe the components, the resources within it. And then, of course, this notion of this, actually, Borg and others were based on the promise theory, right, of making so that distributed components would ultimately cohabitate and evolve in such a way that they can coexist well. And so those are some fundamental things that, in my mind, are what Kubernetes really brings. And then, of course, out of that we say, okay, easy to scale. I can scale up a lot. The other thing, my experience with like VMware and some of these others were about bin packing. The whole thing you're trying to do in a data center is the utilization of hardware, right? That's your real cost, is because of the energy and the thermal and all the things you're doing to keep that thing going. That's really a cost. So what do you want to do? You want to bin pack that thing as much as you can. And VMware, man, it would slow things down after, I don't even want to say. I remember thinking if you could get 10, VM VMs on a box, you're doing well, especially if they were a substantial application, substantial VM. And then, so what's interesting about here is now I can just scale up and down as I want. What was nice about the promise of containers, and sometimes the reality, is this notion of portability. I can move this thing around, and it should run, right? Within reason. And then the other thing is this ensuring the state machine that Kubernetes definitely has, of ensuring the availability and making sure that things are constantly alive and going. And then they have these tremendous amount of plugins and integrations, and it's just amazing. So the whole idea is we think Kubernetes is great because of all these things, and ultimately we think it is a way to optimize our resources to the best possible. That's kind of the dream, right? And I would say the reality for the most part, right?
Get there.
Yeah. But the problem is, even in their brilliance, and even in their consistency, and even in their fundamental attributes of Kubernetes, it still requires a steep learning curve to really get to it, to a state that you think you know enough to not hit too much, right? To not do too much damage, and it can get complex with all these different configurations. YAML, it's nice. Helm came along, and there's others that are trying to do that, but there's still some kind of complexity when you're trying to figure out not just deployment, but this interconnecting, especially when you're talking about things I want to do with storage or other things. And then again, you have the securing of Kubernetes. Again, if you follow basic principles or best practices, it's pretty good, but you still have to worry. Why would I? In fact, wasn't there just recently somebody got hacked because they were still using running container as root? There was one just recently, I think, in which...
I think that's still 99% of deployments.
Yeah.
So.
And so, when you're thinking about, why wouldn't I? It's an isolated box, and Kube should take care of it. In isolation, there's some things that you still have to worry about. And then this notion of, do I really trust the storage? You look at the cloud vendors, and they do a good job, but if you really want to share a disk across pods, it depends on which cloud provider you're on, if you can do it well. And then there's always been the controversy of, do I run databases in Kubernetes? I remember having a wonderful conversation with an individual, which, if the recording is going to be out there, I probably wouldn't mention the name, but they said you would never run a database, ever, in Kubernetes. And I kept on saying, I certainly don't know your perspective, because it's just a disk, it's a CPU, and it's a memory, and I don't know what you're talking about. So, but you still have those questions, right? And so I guess the bottom line of this is this to Kube or not to Kube question is, do we really need that complexity? Do we really need the complexity of Kubernetes? And that's what I would like to just maybe discuss a bit as we go forward. And I think the way I want to propose it is you answer the question by asking more questions, right? And I think the notion is, what are you trying to do with Kubernetes? And what's the size of your team, and what's their skill set? Because it does take a certain amount of DevOps, right? It needs some awareness of networking. Even if you're using managed services, you still need to get into that world.
Especially if you're using managed services.
Especially if yes, because it even becomes more complex, because you're not just talking about the Kubernetes world, you're talking about where it's hosted, and that the VPCs and all the other stuff and all that notion in between. And so the question is, when you're thinking about adopting Kubernetes, is how big is my team? And what's their skill set that's going to support this endeavor? Whether I'm doing it all on my own or in the managed service, I still contend there's a question there. Then the question becomes, really, how complex is my application? Now, there's another talk that will maybe give, and it'll probably be internally, because I think we've all been fooled, believing what some early people said we should do. Netflix, Martin Fowler, and others, great people. But microservices, it's kind of like we went crazy on them. We went crazy on them. And so, really, how complex is my application? Do I really need 100 microservices to have a website that logs in and does e-commerce stuff? Maybe you can convince me, but I'm actually seeing a trend going more toward monoliths than going to microservices. And yet, it's almost like the debate of Scrum, Agile. Is that still great? The principles are still there. They came from XP programming, right? The XP stuff, right? Remember that XP, Extreme XP, the book, that kind of came out of. There's still great principles, but when it comes down to it, it's not an all or nothing. It usually, think about what you're doing. And if the application is not that complex, do you really need all of those services that you need an orchestrator to take care of? And can you deal with somewhat, and I would contend most of the microservice architectures that I've seen are just distributed monoliths. Okay, that's really what they are. So why don't you just say, I could reduce by orders of magnitude my calls if I'm in process. I can actually reduce my understanding of who's accessing the database, and where are the distributed locks going. I can actually simplify some of the questions that I may have if I really think.
You have a chance of debugging it too.
Yeah, you may. You may have a chance of debugging it, And so that's why I say, are we really Netflix? Are we really these companies that really said this is the way to do it? And are they still touting that? Or are they kind of coming back a little bit more towards more of the middle? The other thing is, how much uptime do we really need? Right? And I say that because how much do you want to pay?
All the variations of what that means.
Yeah. I mean, let's say I believe that the world will end, so therefore I need to have my application across the globe. Well, that's probably not going to work when that happens. Somebody's going to bomb Salt Lake, so I need to have another AZ somewhere, and that I'm okay. Well, probably if that happens, there are more things going to be problematic, So the question is, what is my uptime? Do I need my application in 3 AZs, applications, availability zones? Do I need to then think, I need to have this in another region? Because I don't want to get political, but maybe we'll sell off some part of the US to somebody else, or whatever, right? So, I don't know about that one. And then, like you were saying, Todd, let's not even go into the DR world. That's even beyond the ludicrous part of, how much is it going to cost you. The question is, what really is your uptime requirement? How many of us really do believe in 5 nines, 6 nines? And if you do, you have a very large bank account. So that's another question, just asking.
And just because this came up in a meeting where people should know better, because that's the first question I ask, is how many nines? Someone said 5, and I said, you realize we're running on a cloud that only guarantees 3 if you're running in the idle loop of your VM, not bringing anything else. Well, and then, and I hope they're not on the call, but well, we can be aspirational. I said, well, I have to leave the room because I'm an engineer, okay? And every time you add a 9, you double the cost at least.
Yeah,
You double the time to market, all those things that you, so it ain't free, people. I mean, you can get 5 9s on top of 3 9s because most of computer science is making unreliable things reliable, but it's going to cost you more than you're willing to pay.
Yeah, and I think what the key there is, what are you willing to pay based on your application's complexity and the benefit that you're going to get from it, right? Now, we all can say, well, the competition is doing it, so therefore I must do it. Well, that's a arms race, right? Kind of deal. But it'll also come down to what is your budget? You know, like you're saying, can I do 4 9s for the cost? Can I do 3? What's the impact? So these are some questions among many others that could be asked. And then the question is, well, if I'm not going to use Kubernetes, what would I use? Because Paul, you're telling me that Kubernetes is all this wonderful stuff and it does all the things I really want, that if I don't have Kubernetes, I can actually do it with something else? And the answer is maybe. And kind of yes, but not exactly. And the thing is that each one of these that you're aware of has its pros and cons to it. The PaaS, you are locked in, this is the way. This is the Mandalorian world right here, right? This is the way, right? PaaS just, tells you exactly what it's going to be, and don't tell me anything else, right? Not bad, because it may be that I don't care about the infrastructure. I care that the application is running, and I'm making money from it. Serverless architectures those are kind of interesting. They're great for certain things. Again, people forget that Lambda and functions are not applications. And don't try to build an application out of strictly functions. But they're really good for a lot of things, right? And then you have this notion of, well, Docker, containers, that's what Kubernetes is using, right? Why wouldn't I use just plain old Compose? Or I'll put in another slide, Swarm. Or maybe Nomad, which is kind of, I don't even know, they've kind of come and gone, I think they're still there, And SUSE owns Nomad, right?
Rancher, is that part of?
I thought so.
I've been away.
Oh, that's HashiCorp, excuse me, I'm thinking of
Yep.
the Ranch OS.
It's got the Rancher.
Yeah. This one does well. And then, Cloud Run. So there are many different things that you could look up these and say, okay, am I just calculating something? Why not just be a Lambda function? That's my whole service is just to calculate, how much the Taylor Swift concert costs, in blah, blah, Great. Why would I put up a whole cluster for Kubernetes when a function would do to me, the service? And same with any of these
So
other.
the economics were done, I don't know if you've done one recently, where that break between dedicated container versus serverless. And it used to be 66 APIs per second sustained is what on average
Here?
is between, well, where serverless made sense. And so I don't know if those economics still apply, but you gotta realize what your load is.
Well, and the other thing too is, again, know your application, know the complexity, know the uptime. These have cold boot things, right? You have to, what language am I using? What am I trying to do? And how fast is it going to come up? It's almost like, well, if you look at Firecracker, which is kind of a micro VM type thing that came out of, I think it was AWS, wasn't it?
AWS, yeah.
They're trying to do a VM that comes up really fast, but it's still an order of magnitude slower than a container, right? But still, that's in the milliseconds versus a VM, which is in the seconds, right? So you have to take in that consideration, and then the cost of that, right? So I guess the question that I would have, or maybe not a question, but the kind of the statement of, well, how do I go on this journey to adopt a solution, whatever it is, to Kube or not to Kube or whatever? How do I approach that journey? And what are some of the things, again, questions to be asked, but also maybe some principles to follow? And I would say, start small. The key that I found of the success of any new technology is this: find a patron, right? Somebody in your leadership chain that says, I'll trust you. I'll trust you on this. Find somebody that will support you, air cover. The second is find a use case that's small, and I should have said simple, but real. Make your use case something that's real, that will impact the business in a way. Not maybe, mainline, but enough that you could say, if I'm successful, people can understand it. They can see it. They can realize it. And also, it's something that in itself may not be simple. It may be something that you have to overcome some things to do, but make so that it's something that you can do. The other thing too is, for the most part, check a managed service out first. See what they provide. Like all those ones we talked about, either the PaaS, the serverless, or the others. Check them out. See what they provide. Check their cost out. In businesses, what's funny, for salaried people, businesses think we are free, right? That if I have these engineers, it's free for them to do all the maintenance on this system, even though I'm paying them thousands of dollars a year. But they're free because why? The accounting bucket is here for that, and the other accounting is over here. And guess what? I get different tax things over here when I pay Google or AWS. Just like I did when I had depreciation of my hardware in my data center. But these are kind of like, so they're free. So the thing is, well, they're not actually free because they could actually be doing something else. And so if you're thinking that I have free people to do the managing of these services, weigh the cost, weigh the skill set, weigh the time involved versus that managed solution that may be already out there. Okay. Again, I'm not saying, in fact, if people don't know me well enough, they'd say, Paul, you never like managed services. And the answer is, you're right. Because I want to understand the technology first to understand I like the managed service, or I don't like it, or what they're doing or what they're not doing, that I like or don't like. The other is definitely use the community resources that are out there. Learn from each other. That's what meetups are about. There are case studies, blogs, who name it. You can have so many. What's wonderful about our industry is the community, right? And the community of diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of just even perspective. You can have somebody that will be over here and convince me I would never go off of bare metal. And I can go over here and says, I'm just a little function, that'll always be out there, and why would I ever do anything but all these functions, right? Or in between. So use the community's knowledge, resources, and what's very wonderful about our industry, the support. I mean, how many people get support from people that really we'll never meet in our lifetime, and that are caring just because they care? And so definitely use the resources that are out there. The other is focus on understanding the core principles first in anything that you adopt. Because if you just accept it, even in a managed service perspective, if you don't understand those fundamental concepts, you can't make subsequent decisions as to whether you should stay there or not, or what you could do differently in that environment or not. As well as to be able to go to other people and say, you know what, this is great for this type of world. I don't know about this world. And so then you can actually then have that understanding because you've mastered those principles to say, I know how it really works here really, really well. I'm not sure over here. So therefore, you can be more of a resource by knowing that. And then I would say adopt the best practices that are out there. There are very few pioneering moments, in my opinion, today. Some appear to be very pioneering moments, and they are in many ways in how they've packaged things, how they've approached things. But fundamentally, a lot of this stuff has not changed a whole lot, right? But the reason why I say that is because of that, there's still incredibly established best practices that are out there to borrow from, and to actually the shoulder thing, right? The standing on the shoulders of giants. We can learn from when you would not want to use a Lambda that all of a sudden spins out of control, and you're owing AWS, $20,000 for a 6-minute thing, right? And you had no idea why, and they forgive you hopefully, but use those best practices that are out there and adopt them.
One of those things though is adopting best practices. You got to know that bullet point before.
And that's the key, because this will help you understand. And this is where I think is the word that's kind of hard.
Yeah.
Because what is my mentor used to say, as many others did say before, the enemy of good is better. Not in a moral way, but in just in technology. He says, no, I can do better. That's not the best way. I can do that better. And the answer is, I don't know. But if I understand those core concepts really well, I can say, that's just another way. And that's justifying what you're thinking. That another way would be something we would try or not. Don't say it's better or best yet. And so thank you. I think that's pretty important. So let me see. How I got off here? Oh. That it? No. My machine is locked. Oh, there we go. All right. So there's some pragmatic approaches to some questions to ask, maybe some things on the way of your decision journey. And here are some thoughts of, well, if I'm not going to do Kubernetes, what are some things out there? And this is just a very simple list. And you'll look at this and you go, Paul, that is Kubernetes. And the answer is, yeah. They just have done something a little bit on top of it for some of these. But some of these are very, very different. Very, very different. Some of them are kind of that mixture of a deployment platform PaaS. Like Encore, if anyone's looked at Encore, it's just for TypeScript or Go. They have the tooling to do things, build things, create things, and then it deploys them. It's the whole kind of ecosystem that way. And there are others. And then you have all these others that are kind of interesting. I guess Flintlock is the firecracker world now. I think firecracker is now called Flint.
A lot of providers are using Firecracker under the hood, like FlyIO is using
Firecracker. Yeah, FlyIO, yeah. And then, it's interesting. I don't mean to disparage Docker in any way, but, Docker Swarm was a good try. And for a lot of people in Europe, they still use Docker Swarm. And so the key is again, understand these technologies as best you can to see where they excel and where their limitations are. And in that equation, if they sit within the parameters, again, of those other things, how complex my application, what are the things that I can live with, and what are the things I can't, so therefore these may not fit. Now, I'm sure there's so many others out there that you could list as well. And that's kind of what I'd like to do next is, one, have a discussion on how do you determine when to use Kubernetes or not. Maybe you've already made that decision, but how did you would be a question. And then the question, it would be, what are you going to do if you're not going to use Kubernetes? So I'm going to stop here with this type of a presentation. And I would really like to ask maybe some questions to you, just to start a discussion and see where it goes from there, if that makes sense. Any questions before we do that? Any questions before the questions? Okay. So first of all, how many are using Kubernetes today? Thank you. And if you have questions online, just speak up. How many of you are also using virtual machines? Okay. I shouldn't say also, but who are using virtual machines today? How many of you are in the cloud? How many are you in a data center? Okay. How many are you?
You didn't ask if they are a data center.
Well, they could be, yes. How many are you in a hybrid mode? A data center, meaning bare metal, and cloud. Okay, okay. Any online the same way? Okay, Eric is. And then my question that's dovetailed to that last one is, how many are you in the migration pattern of from bare metal data center to cloud, or is it that you're staying with that hybrid because of various reasons? So how many are moving towards, or how many are just staying because of what, makes sense? How many are staying in the data center and in the cloud, both? Nobody?
Both.
Yeah.
I work for a software vendor, so I'm responsible for customers that want to deploy either way.
Okay.
One's definitely easier than the other.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
for the
and the reason I want to ask, because a lot of us, when we talk about managed services, we're talking about a cloud offering. We're talking typically other than some consultant group coming in and doing all that stuff, and then you have no idea what happened, and then you're in a big mess. But so the issue is, a lot of people find, and I think we're seeing, that cloud spend is getting high for a lot of companies. And again, it's those bucket things, right, that we talked about as to how they're paying for things. But when you think about it, and again, I don't want you to quote this because I think it kind of goes up and down depending upon situation, but I have read that typically in a Kubernetes cluster, the nodes are running at about 30 to 40% utilization, typically. So they're underutilized in at least their CPU, and most often in their memory. So we are definitely wasting money in the cloud for some of that. Also, there may be companies that have petabytes of data that you think, wow, that costs a lot of money compared to going down to Best Buy and getting a disk drive farm and putting it locally, for various reasons. I know there's, you want replication and all that other stuff, but some people are thinking, that's a lot of money to put all that data up there, and also, I have to put my data up there, then I have to put my compute up there too, and then it kind of balloons. So that's an interesting question. Okay, please.
Yeah, and if you're in IoT, there's that fire hose that's coming from all these sensors, devices, stuff that you're paying for. Turns out that most of that stuff is ignorable. It should be filtered out before it ever hits the cloud, but rarely do they architect it that way. So that's.
When you think, and this is because we're all in life here together, how many of us, it's like those ads that are kind of obnoxious, how many of us have unknown subscriptions that we're still paying for, right? It's kind of like, that's the whole beauty of a cloud model, is that subscription, right? And sometimes you don't realize what you're paying for and not utilizing. And so that's why I wanted to ask if the pendulum is swinging a little bit more towards, well, maybe not fully cloud, or maybe coming back. I don't know. Todd?
No, because we're recorded. I'm not representing my employer in any of this, but I have actually been moving out of the cloud because for all of my personal projects and side business stuff, yes, I have a side business, but it doesn't make money. like many of us. I highly encourage everybody to just have an LLC that,
You learn a lot.
totally worth a Saturday of tax stuff every year.
Just a Saturday? Oh, you're lucky.
I have it down to a system, but the key for me was $150 a month for like the barest bones Kubernetes cluster in whatever cloud at the time versus like just below $2,000 on like a really high-end, beefier than you'll ever need server, and now I have more than I could ever want, and I mean, internet's fast enough at home in many places, especially here in Utah, go Utah, that it just makes more sense to go that way for me, and I don't think I'll ever move out because it's so expensive. It's so expensive in the cloud now.
And I apologize to ask online, are you able to hear people in the audience, okay? Can you thumbs up if you are able to hear? Okay, good. If not, we can have them repeat. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is, like we talked about earlier, is that notion of every one of us pays insurance because of the fact that it may happen, and then I don't want to have to lump sum something at that time. But just like the actuaries love in the insurance world, they're all based on statistics. So what is the probability that your house is going to get on fire and that $2,000 box is gone and all your business is over? It's there.
Yeah, it exists.
And it exists, but is it worth the insurance? And that's where I would say very carefully, we're paying insurance for the cloud to take care of all that. It's a type of an insurance policy.
I'm sure he still uses GitHub though.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure he has his stuff in.
I bet he probably has using.
Then that is a concern.
I do use GitHub, but not for everything.
I will point out data centers can burn too.
Yeah.
And they have.
And clouds aren't exactly 100% reliable either.
And when you go and try to tell them like, oh, you were my insurance policy, they'll clearly point to their 4 9s or 5 9s and say, well, you got lucky and rolled the dice and.
And I think that's what I'm saying is that I think there's a place, and I believe in cloud. And I think there is, but is it a cloud or nothing? And the answer is no. I think you have to be very careful in what you're trying to do. In the IoT world, that isn't the cloud, but it kind of is in the cloud, but it's not. You're still worrying about, like you're saying, it's the number game when you're talking about IoT stuff and all the interconnections and that stuff, and that gets weird.
Well, and I know you're not concerned about the edge in this meeting, but Kubernetes has moved to the edge.
Yep.
And I resisted that. We did put Docker at the edge,
Yep.
but if we put Kubernetes at the edge with the embedded engineers, they would have burnt my house down. They do not want this. And they see me as a cloud person. So I was very careful in deploying, but Docker at the edge does make sense. It's a thing. And I ran simulations to show that it would actually work because they had all their security and they listed all the things. And we didn't need Kubernetes at the edge because I showed that it would handle the traffic of our biggest campus in the world and have headroom on a Raspberry Pi. So yeah, that's Docker running on a Raspberry Pi. And then that argument goes away. But you don't need necessarily, or K3 or any of these other simplified Kubernetes at the edge. So.
Well, and I think the key, what you're saying is analyze what you need. It may be that you don't need it, but the reason why you do use it is for other reasons. Meaning you can prove that you don't need it, but you need it because you don't have the staff. You don't have somebody that can understand what's going on. And that Kubernetes does it for me, and these other systems maybe do it for me. So I think the key is I agree with you wholeheartedly that you don't need it, but you may use it anyways.
Well, the day may come, but like I said, I don't want these in, because they didn't even want to learn Docker.
Yeah.
Because they're used to the.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about, and let's be very clear, we're talking about the edge. You're talking about IoT devices.
Yeah, I'm talking about,
Versus what some would say an edge would be.
and there is,
Like a PO, a point of sales, in a store, right?
yeah, and
That's where you kind of go like.
different people, yeah, will define the edge differently.
Yeah,
And some people will actually say the edge is in the cloud, but it's periphery to the cloud.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to me, the edge is on site.
okay, so let's dial back a little bit and say, okay, so what are the things that you've seen in those that have had experience with Kubernetes? That you say, you know what, for all of the things we've talked about, it really has saved me because of blah. It really has made sense that decision that was made was a good one. What are some of the things that you've found? Otherwise, why are you staying?
I wrote a whole blog article about how I really push back on the whole Kubernetes is complicated thing because it's not. It's not complicated. You're going to need to learn every single thing that Kubernetes does in your own stupid stack of whatever it is. You're going to need to figure out, okay, what will actually run the application? What is going to restart the application if it fails? What's going to monitor it? What's going to do the proxies? What's going to do all these things in the stack? And like you, I've had my journey and done it in a bunch of verticals and different OSs at different times with different hardware. And it's not complicated. It just isn't. But it does solve a lot of those complexities in like one API, one interface with a lot of building blocks to build it exactly the way I want. And I mean, again, I use it for my personal projects because it's just so much easier to manage the whole process in an automated fashion that I can just say, good, it's running. I know it's running because otherwise my phone would blow up and I will never have to look at this again.
Well, and I think what you're saying, Todd, is really valid. I don't think it's complex as much as most people, but when you think about people thinking that it's free, you're absolutely right. And that's what we found out when I was talking about it earlier. When we tried to do our own, I realized we are not going to be able to do this. And when I looked at the beauty, and I would really say the beauty of Kubernetes in its fundamental structure and the API and all the things that it does, these are brilliant people. It does it really well. Why would I think I could do it differently? So I agree with you. I just think that sometimes, if I look back on my career, depending upon the size of the company of a startup that I would be in, when would I adopt it and when would I not? Meaning, would I start it if the company just started? What would I just, hey, this is great, we're going to use this technology, boom. Versus I'm coming into an established startup that's all they're trying to do is break even and get more revenue, get more funding. Do I introduce Kubernetes into that system? And is the bang worth the buck? I would say yes, because I've done that. But I question sometimes when I look back thinking, did I do okay?
I'm not sure it's reproducible. And I think the team that you have, like if you have just a bunch of juniors who don't know any of the things, learn Kubernetes. You're going to have great things. The community's awesome. The tooling's there, all that stuff. But if you have like a bunch of people from another stack, like managing VMs in a rack or something, like if they've got the tooling, if they've got the monitoring, if they've got all the things you need to operate, why would you switch?
Correct.
That is a question that is situational. And I'm not sure I could like trust just random person to come up with it the way that like I think this community would consider best practices.
I agree.
So that's me, exactly. I work for a vendor where we are an identity solution 24/7. We have our own clustering on top of Kubernetes clustering, and we're a legacy product. And we are there because our customers have demanded it. And we're trying to put 10 pounds of something into a 5-pound bag. And we've created our own, infrastructure, our own deployment models that are unique to our company. And it's not our forte. And so we have developers that got good enough because the push was large enough to try to get into Fed or whatever. and then it's kind of like played to, then they've gone away. And so there's people like me who have, I worked for Novell for a long time, and which was the best thing because I got to see
Yep.
OS, we own networking, we had 2 flavors of Linux and 1 flavor of Unix, and it helped me understand it, and even in clustering, but this abstraction on top of other abstractions, and then I have to work with customers who have it, and they are these juniors who are, vendors that, we're doing hybrids in the clouds, and they keep asking me, why can't our product do it? Why can't our product be the DevOps where all the rest of these microservices that are being developed have those little, can be pieced together, but we're a 20-year-old product that's trying to,
Survive.
Yeah, and I love the idea of it, but for me, it's difficult because I don't have the time to dedicate to it in our customer, but.
It's fair.
And that is the cautionary tale, because if you put in Kubernetes, you should have a Todd, even to mentor these junior people, because or you need a Paul.
Greg.
Yeah, I'm leaving.
Managed service.
No, and that is the thing that we failed at, is that I'm not DevOps, but our DevOps team said they could do this. I thought we're going after too many sacred cows in that company. Let's put off the Kubernetes thing. And it was a face plant, big time. Like, I'm now retired, but last I heard is they're backing away from that because it got so bad for them. So anyway, so before you jump into the Kubernetes, pool, be sure you have a lifeguard. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I appreciate that cautionary tale. So I think what I'll do is, we're at the bottom of the hour, and I think I'm just going to sum up a little bit, and then we can have other discussion afterwards. I hope that the discussion presentation doesn't imply that I don't have a tattoo of Kubernetes. I don't, but I virtually do, because I still believe in Kubernetes heavily. I believe in it because of what it's done and what it continues to do. And as we talked about, that community aspect is amazing. I'm also, a very great proponent of cloud vendors such as, JKE or Google and GCP and others, because of what they do to provide that notion of, if I believe it needs to have this reliability, I can get it from them. And I don't have to sleep. I can sleep. I don't have to be sleeping on the old pagers. And remember the old people would actually have multiple pagers, right? Those are the real DevOpers. And a cell phone. So I believe in those things. I just think that as you go forward in your journey, that just be open-eyed as far as why you do things. Don't do it because everybody's doing it. And again, not dissing, but a little bit, everyone's doing microservices, so it must be good. They are good for certain things. But you've ever seen Netflix internal services thing? I've seen spider webs that are a lot more simple and beautiful than that. And I don't know of anybody that can say to me, you should be like those guys. Right? So be careful of how you adopt things, why you adopt them, and then rely on people and the community that will help you. So, thank you.